What is up, everyone? My name is Joseph, and welcome to episode number 2 of Bossing Till Broke, the series where I give myself a set budget of supplies and I continue to boss until I'm broke, at least in terms of that budget anyway. In today's episode, we did Zulrah. And instead of just giving ourselves a budget for supplies, I also gave us a budget for gear. So this is actually budget gear Zulrah. So if you're interested in seeing how far 10 mil of supplies will get you using 10 mil worth of gear, this is the right video for you. Just as a quick heads up, if you do enjoy this content and you want to watch it live, head on over to twitch.tv/JosephsPlace. That's where I stream pretty much all of the PVM related content to this series. So if you're interested in that, go over and check that out. However, if you want to just watch these recaps that I do once the content is ready to produce, just subscribe to the channel if you're not already. Also, if you do enjoy the series, stay tuned to the end of the video. There will be a poll, a little YouTube poll to kind of determine what the next episode of this will be. I already have an idea of the structure for the next few episodes, actually, and I want to get your guys' opinions on the specifics for some of that. But that's enough of the self-promotion and all of that. Let's get into the actual content of this video. So first things first, let's talk about the gear that I bought, because I think this is one of the most important parts of this video. I want to go over where I spent my 10 mil and why I think how I spent this money was the most effective use of the 10 mil that I had available to me. So when you go into specific encounters and when you're looking for upgrades in gear, the first thing you really need to look at is your weapons. In general, your weapons are going to give you the most bang for your bucks, the most DPS for the GP that you're spending. So that was the first thing that I looked into. So the first thing that I bought, hands down, was the blowpipe. I figured that the upgrade from the blowpipe, or from the rune crossbow to the blowpipe, was going to be the absolute best thing I could get for my money, and I was right. If you take a look at the DPS numbers, there's just no comparison based on how fast you're going to get these kills, and the faster you can get kills, the faster you're going to make money. So while you do have a little bit more of a supply cost with the scales, it's definitely worth it in the long run because you'll be making more money in the time period. So the blowpipe was 100% worth getting. So that took about 4 mil out of our budget. Now, the next item that I had to kind of decide on was the weapon for the magical portion of it, or maging Zulrah. So there were really two options. There's either the Trident of the Seas or the Trident of the Swamp. Now, the Trident of the Seas is much, much, much cheaper. However, the DPS is considerably lower. So when I was going to decide on which of these two to buy, I really had to look at what the extra money would allow me to buy if I went with the cheaper option, or what I would be losing if I went with the more expensive option. So if we had gone with the Trident of the Seas, we would have been able to afford a Rims. So the real DPS comparisons are the Trident of the Seas with the Rims versus the Trident of the Swamp with Void, because that would have been the next best option for us. So using the DPS calculator spreadsheet that I've been using for quite a few months now, I plugged in the Trident of the Seas with a Nezi helm, barrels, gloves, and a Rims robe top and skirt, and then I compared it against the Trident of the Swamp with full Void. And the option with the Swamp and the full Void was actually over 9% more DPS than the previous options, about 9.14% of a DPS increase. Now, the Trident of the Swamp is going to have a considerably higher cost of use or supply cost, but again, I felt like a 9% DPS increase over the other option was enough to offset that. So we're going to be making more per hour to the point where that supply cost isn't as relevant. So for my first two items, I just decided to pick up both the blowpipe and the Trident of the Swamp, or the Toxic Trident, and that ate up a lot of my budget, over 80% of it. Those two items combined cost just over 8 mil, probably about 8.2 at the time that I bought them. So we didn't have a lot left to work with. So like I mentioned before, we did have to go with the Void option for the armor. We had to go with Elite Void. Now, that was, again, less DPS than it would have been to use Blessed D'hide or a Rims, but I didn't think the extra switches would have been worth. Since we already established we couldn't afford a Rims, we'd have to bring Elite Mage Void or Mystic, and then also D'hide, and I just didn't think that amount of switches would have been worth it for the extra DPS, if any. Now, Mystic compared to Void, it leans on the Void side in terms of DPS, so we probably would have brought Elite Void and the D'hide, but since we would have had to have a glove switch and a helmet switch, that would have been a lot of extra items to bring for switches and less food to bring per trip, so I decided to go with both Elite Void Range and Elite Void Mage. So with the rest of the money I had left, I decided to invest in a few big magic-based items, mainly the Book of Darkness and the Occult Necklace. I felt like those would give a substantial increase in DPS over any ranged options we could have chosen, like the Blessed D'hide boots. So I decided to pick up those as our next big items, and after we had those, there really wasn't much left over spending cash. So with the little amount I had left, I decided to pick up some Mystic Boots, Snake Skin Boots, and then a Glory Amulet for our next switch on Ranged. And that was pretty much our final gear setup. I'll show all the items on screen and the switches, but that was pretty much what I decided would be necessary, or what the best option would be to spend our 10 mil on while trying to get these Zulrah kills. And I still believe that that was pretty much the best way we could have spent that money. So if you are looking to fight Zulrah and you have around that 10 mil price range for gear, look at something like a loadout similar to this. Now, if you don't have Void, you can go back to Mystic and Blessed D'hide. It's not a huge drop in DPS, but I would suggest having Void because I think it has a lot of uses, a lot of mid-level uses, and I think for that price range, having Void would be helpful overall, so I would suggest picking it up. But that was really how I decided to spend the 10 mil. So the next step was to kind of learn Zulrah. So what I want to do now is kind of talk about the progress or the trials and the struggles I had while learning Zulrah. Because when I started Zulrah, when I started this episode, I didn't have a lot of experience with Zulrah. I had about 100, 150 kills, but I hadn't done those kills in a while. So I was a little bit rusty. Now, I had originally learned Zulrah using ZulrahGuide.com. Now, that website is no longer supported. The domain is no longer hosted. So what I actually did was made my own. So I'll link a video in the description of a video I made overviewing that website. But I basically made my own rotation guide website. And that helped me for a little bit trying to get through that early stages until I memorized the rest of the rotations, which really didn't take that long. I did have a decent understanding of the boss. And again, I had, I think, 149 KC going into it. So I knew what I was doing, at least at a basic point. And then it didn't take much more work after that to kind of finalize and memorize the rest of the rotations. So that's really what I did first to kind of learn Zulrah, and the first difficulty I had was, again, memorizing the rotations. After that, it was really just learning when and how to conserve food, and I think this is something that's very important with Zulrah because of just the chaotic nature of the boss fight. Now, I've talked about this a lot while streaming Zulrah, but I want to kind of go over it now because I think understanding this will explain how help you learn Zulrah just a little bit better. So I don't like Zulrah because of just the chaotic nature of the boss, and the damage you take is honestly kind of unavoidable and random. If you have a bad mage phase where you take 3 range hits, it can do 90 damage. And there's no counterplay to that other than eating up during the fight and losing DPS. And going into this fight coming from something like Vorkath, where the damage is a little more predictable and a little bit more avoidable, it's hard to kind of gauge when the best times to eat are. And I struggled with this for the first 50 kills or so, knowing when to eat up to full, or knowing when to eat a Karam one compared to a Manta Ray, or knowing when to just risk it on low health on a mage phase or something like that. So while the positioning is important, and I think that's one of the most important things, I think the next important thing is just knowing when the unavoidable damage is going to come and just being able to be ready for it. So that was kind of what I went through mentally while learning this boss, or becoming more experienced at this boss. So now let's get into the part that I think is probably what you guys are here for, the loot tab. And what kind of loot tab did I have from the 10 mil of supplies, and how many KC did I get, and how much GP per hour. So let's get into that. Now, as a quick disclaimer, I did have a few supplies left over when I sold the tab. I think about 300 to 400K in supplies left over. My personal rule is that if I'm below 5% of the initial budget, I'm able to stop at any time. Because if not, I'd have to, sell 1 potion here for another potion, sell 200 darts or 200 of this to buy, 1 extra kill worth of supplies. And honestly, that's more annoying than it's worth. So I decided to, once I hit a point where I ran out of charges on my blowpipe, my trident, I had 3 or 4 each potion left, I decided to just call it there. So keep that in mind as you look at the loot tab. But let's get into all that information now. So I started this little adventure with 148 Zulrah KC, and I ended with my last kill being my 414th KC, which is a total of 266 kills. So if we do that quick math, we spent about 35 to 38K GP per kill. So that was the supply cost of each kill based on having a 10 mil budget and getting that many kills. Now, our kills per hour definitely varied. I was streaming it, so I was semi-distracted for some of it. But if we look past at the VODs and kind of calculate it out, we went up from getting from like 10 to 14 kills per hour, upwards to 20 to 22. Now, it really depends and varies on how lucky I got with some hits and stuff like that. But I definitely was able to jump up noticeably in my kills per hour as my kills per trip increased. So if we look at the drops, let's take a look at the drops, and here's what the ending loot tab looked like. Now, I did get very lucky. I got one of each of the 3 tradable uniques. I got a Serpentine Visage really early on, but then I didn't actually get the other 2 until towards the end, and I got them in very quick succession, the Tanzanite Fang and the Magic Fang, but I was able to get those 3 items, so that is going to bump my GP per hour up quite a bit because I'm pretty sure I was lucky for getting all 3 of those in 266 kills. But that's the main focal point of the kills. Everything else you can see on screen here if you're wondering how many drop of whatever specific item I got. But the total amount that I got after selling these and selling the gear, because I was selling the gear back because I wanted to see how much profit I would make, was 54 mil. So 54 mil is what we ended up with after starting with 20 mil. That being 10 mil for a supply budget and 10 mil for the actual equipment or the actual gear. So we came out with 34 mil profit from those 266 kills, which was an average of about 125 to 130k profit or GP per kill. And then if you take the supply cost out of it, it's just under 100k profit per kill, which really isn't too bad. Now, if we multiply that out by the kills per hour that we got, we're looking at anywhere from starting at 1.4 to 1.5 mil GP when I was still learning it, up towards 2 to 3 mil towards the end, depending on how many kills I got per specific hour. But overall, we're looking at a range from 1.5 to 3 mil GP per hour throughout the entire experience. And overall, it's not too bad. We were using budget gear. Now, keep in mind that our gear was only 10 mil. We were using Void as our equipment, as our armor, and we did have decent weapons, but that was pretty much it. And we were able to pull out an average of around just over 2 mil GP per hour. It's not bad. That's pretty good. With the profit of 34 mil, we might have gotten a little lucky on the drops, but the drop rate for those items isn't really too high. So if you're looking to grind out, kills and a lot of kills on Zulrah, you should be expecting, to get those drops at least relatively consistently. But that is what we ended up with. That is what our final loot tab looked like and what our final profit was. And that's it. I hope this has given you a better idea of what to expect from Zulrah and what kind of profit you can expect if you're a little bit on the lower end of mid-level, a little bit on the poorer side in terms of bank value. So that does do it for the Zulrah portion. I did want to just quickly ask you guys what you guys would like to see in terms of the next episodes coming up. I plan to do a mini series within this series where I do one episode on each of the God Wars bosses. So I'm going to leave a poll up in the upper right hand corner of this video. Just vote on which God Wars boss you would like to see first, whether it be Sarah, Arma, Zami, or Bandos. Now, I think this will be an interesting series because I have varying experience on all of these bosses. For example, Armadillo I've only killed once for the diary, but Sarah I have, I think, 150 KC on. I've done a lot of Bandos and Zami duos, but relatively small amount of solos. So I think there's going to be a lot of content in this. So if you guys want to see a specific boss, vote on it in that poll, and let me know in the comments what type of gear you think would be interesting to view this as. Should we go mid-level? Should we go 50 mil worth of gear? Or should we keep it relatively low? Let me know. But that is all I have for this video. Hope you guys did enjoy it. Hope you learned a little something about the boss, or at least were entertained with the loot tab. But that is all I have for this video. Again, if you guys do want to watch anything I do live, I stream about 3 times a week over on twitch.tv/JosephsPlace. But that is all I have for this video. Again, I hope you guys did enjoy it, and I will see you next time.